I'm going to hand you over to Gavin Starks. If you have anything to do with open and open data, Gavin needs no introduction. If you don't, I suggest you look up the bio and the CV for Gavin on our website. You'll see he's the former CEO, the founding first CEO of the Open Data Institute, and currently he is the CEO of Icebreaker One, which puts him in the perfect position to do this panel. And I'm going to add a wee extra thanks to Gavin because he's actually going for a massive presentation across at COP when he leaves this. And it's very generous of you to do this first. It's very appreciated.
Thank you, Amanda, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you all here. I will want to open this up to questions pretty quickly, so do start thinking, and I think there might be a roving mic that will come round and we can get the questions to the panelists as well. I'll pass and just go around the panel in a second, get everyone to introduce themselves. But just by way of introduction, open innovation here is, for me, really coming of age. I've worked around the open source space for a number of decades now. It's slightly terrifying when you start measuring things in decades. And in open data now for over 15 years as well, creating both commercial companies in the open data landscape as well as non-profits. And we'll talk more about the kind of commercial incentives, I think, as we go through this. But I'd like to just quickly go around our panel and get everyone to introduce themselves. So Lonneke, do you want to go first?
Sure. So welcome, everybody. My name is Lonneke Driessen, and I work for a non-profit organization called the Open Charge Alliance. And we help acceleration of electric vehicle adoption by working on open source standards for EV charging. We have been open source from day one, and open source has helped us tremendously grow and has brought us where we are today. Electric vehicles, as you may know, are of course one piece of the big puzzle of solving CO2 emissions reductions. And it is not only about vehicles, but also trains, buses, trucks, planes. Everything should use zero emission powertrains. So we started in an age more than 10 years ago where electric vehicles hardly existed. There were no vehicles available, there was nowhere to charge. Most people didn't believe that electric vehicles would ever catch on. There was no money being invested and there was no money to be made. So it was a time of visionaries, pioneers, startups. And of course, back then, open source made perfect sense. So we started with that notion, inspired by all the open source developments in other industries. And we are very happy, or I'm very happy to be here today to maybe explain a little bit about the journey we've been on and what we still need to do and where we would need your help still in conquering this transition.
Thank you. Helen.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Helen Crooks, and I'm the Chief Data Officer at Ofgem, which is the UK regulator looking after the energy sector and protecting consumers. I've also got another role, which is actually with Innovate UK, looking at how we can enhance and enjoy the investments that come through for innovation in data and AI economy, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that as we go through the panel. I come back from a background of data. I'm a data expert. I don't pretend to be an energy expert, but what I do bring and what I like to talk about is how we can actually harness the power of data, and especially open data. For me, if I look at data, it can do a number of different things. It can really enable innovation. We cannot innovate in this sector, in this age, without data. It helps us as a regulator actually look at what does the future look like. And I've found the panel discussions this morning really interesting in thinking about, well, how do you regulate a open or digital economy, especially for energy? How do you make sure you don't put the incorrect controls in place? And then finally, it's about measurement. So there's a lot of discussion about how we can open up data to operate or to facilitate the actual, some of the high-level monitoring. But unless we open up data to monitor some of the real low-level activities that we're investing in, how do we ensure that we're actually achieving those goals? So I'm interested in how we can actually make that happen from a regulatory perspective.
Thank you. And Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Dobson. I work for the Energy Systems Catapult, practice manager for data systems. The Energy Systems Catapult is a not-for-profit set up by government a few years ago now, and we work with the energy sector to help deliver innovation and create collaboration across the sector, trying to create opportunities for innovators to grow and thrive. In my experience in the Catapult, I've had the pleasure of running the Energy Data Task Force with Laura Sands a few years ago, and now the Energy Digitalisation Task Force, where we're taking that forwards even further and pushing a bit harder. But I get to work with innovators in the energy sector on a day-to-day basis, helping them use data, access information, and deliver benefits and hopefully decarbonisation.
Thank you. So one of the questions we want to start exploring today is what's changing? You know, what's the difference between the way we're approaching energy production, so the supply and the demand side, and its distribution, and what's coming. And one of the themes there is that we have to electrify all of our transport and heating. So the systems themselves are going to have to be far more integrated. But Helen, if I come to you first, what's the scale of change here that we think we're looking at?
Yeah, well, I think the scale is massive. I mean, it sort of goes without saying, because if you look at everything that we introduce, there's some sort of digital fingerprint, there's some sort of digital connection. And as I just said, if I were to think about how we're trying to enable that whole ecosystem, instead of just having the physical layer, we're now going to have a digital layer. It then expands even further because you've got going from a relatively small number of organisations that are delivering those energy solutions to a wide range of providers. Some of them are physical, looking at the EV charging, implementing EV charging points, etc., smart meters, all of that. But some of them are actually digital operators, data operators. They're third parties that need to be part of that ecosystem. And how you encourage the right sort of environment to get that interconnectivity working is a real challenge from a regulatory perspective. It's taking the focus from being a small number of organisations delivering to the population to thousands of organisations still delivering to the population, but where the population's got more components that you're actually trying to connect together.
Great. So I think there's over 9,000 companies in the UK energy sector, and that's before we start looking at transport and related sectors. So, Richard, are we ready?
$1 million question, really, isn't it? I think lots of people have said this already today. The technology isn't the problem here. We have the components, we have the widgets. Lots of it will get evolved and will develop further and will become more effective and more efficient. But it's really about that integration between the physical, the digital, and actually what the end consumer wants, or the end customer, as we should probably be saying. And I think the scale of change is like massive, as Helen said, because we're really trying to think about how do we integrate technologies that are much more complex than the solutions we have today in a way that means consumers are likely to actually use them and want to use them and get a good experience out of it. And as we know, deploying a digital solution isn't hard. Making the customer experience really good and really slick is the hard bit.
And so companies are ready, they're all wired up and ready to be interoperable?
Well, I think the technology is ready, and there's probably a distinction. I mean, I'm sure plenty of the innovators in this room or watching online would 100% be ready to do this. I think when we're bringing along an incumbent sector that is, particularly an engineering style sector, a very skilled discipline, but not necessarily digitally engineering. They're used to physical engineering projects. So there's a massive change in culture that's necessary there. And some of the panels that talked earlier about how do we try and create that open, interoperable, collaborative culture, that's really what we need, but we need to do it very fast, which is a slight challenge.
So zoning in on some of those challenges, one of the energy companies I was speaking to recently reminded me that just 15 years ago their primary role was to lay cables in the ground. So they didn't really have even the role of a chief data officer as a concept in the organization. So this idea of a huge culture shift to a physical layer, to adding this digital layer, is going to bring lots of challenges with it. But one of those challenges, I think, is going to be some legacy thinking. And Lonica, what's been your experience in the EV world as these different cultures have come to bear on each other and trying to encourage interoperability as we go?
Yes, sure. So first of all, I think that for energy companies, and many energy companies know this, that the emergence of electric vehicles is sort of a great solution, because it's a win-win-win situation where you are seeing more and more renewable energy power put onto the grid, intermittent. So wind and solar have certain times of the day that they are present. And you can use electric transportation and electric vehicles to absorb all those renewable energies at the moment that they are being produced. So they offer great flexibility. So energy companies in general are very positive towards the introduction of electric vehicles. The thing what we see is that with the regulation being put in place and the urgency that everybody feels for CO2 reduction, there are now companies that are really investing heavily into this industry, which were not investing 10 years ago. So the oil industry, so British Petroleum, Shell, Total, also car companies, OEMs like Volkswagen. And what they are doing is they are seeing that they are going to need to come with another solution. For instance, the oil industry needs to replace their petrol sales with electricity sales. So they are rolling out charging infrastructure, and of course they are also setting up energy companies. So oil companies are becoming electric utility companies, and they see a great opportunity with venturing up and down the value chain and becoming basically a competitor of energy companies. Car companies are doing the same. So the OEM Volkswagen has also set up a utility company called Volkswagen Alley, and they are also going to sell electricity. So what is something that be very aware of is that at the moment in time where we need cooperation from the oil, from the electricity, from the car industry, at the same time they are venturing into a competitive development. And that is, of course, not a good ground for collaboration and data sharing and working together. And we see this unfolding literally now in front of the European Commission regulation, where very bluntly, car companies are refusing to share data with other parties. And of course, sharing data is really important if you want to develop technology and innovate. So I think it's very challenging. I think it's a very challenging time. It could be a great time, but we should be cautious that it doesn't develop into a battle.
Well, that's a great point. I can see some questions coming from the audience. I don't know if we've got a roving mic. If we do, great. If we bring it over here, I'm just going to reflect on, I'll come to you in just 1 second, but I want to pick up on this point, because I think it's one of the big challenges here, is you've got large incumbent industries, the oil industry and the car industry, colliding, and energy companies, mixing metaphors there with collisions in cars. But the idea here that we're entering into a competitive environment, which by definition from those industries likes to build proprietary solutions, likes to build OEM type solutions where there's very tightly controlled ecosystems. What's how do we do open innovation in this context? I'll come to you, Richard, and then to Helen. Just get a couple of perspectives. Maybe bring the commercial perspective in first, and then Helen, what does the public sector do about this? What does government do about it?
I think when we start in the future world, the future energy world, we know it's not going to be as simple as having the silos. And I'm sure we've seen on every caricature of every single talk, there's always been a silo bit in it so far today. But we know with electric vehicles, we are trying to combine sectors with very different ways of working, very different attitudes to how they treat the customer, very different attitudes to how fast they innovate and how they thrive on innovation or not. And actually, they're not all necessarily compatible in the way they are today. And I think that's why it's very interesting, particularly for innovators coming into the sector. So we're seeing, obviously, the likes of Tesla come in and really take two industries, energy and automotive, and do it very differently to both of them. And obviously there's strengths and weaknesses to that approach, and there's lots of competition, but it's a really interesting time for that. It is complex, particularly when you're trying to combine multiple sectors with different regulatory environments or different policy environments. It's actually quite challenging to try and make a coherent business model across those areas. We are seeing innovators doing it and making commercially viable companies, which is cool. And we're seeing lots of not-for-profits like Icebreaker One coming around that are much more mission-driven and trying to deliver an outcome regardless of regardless of profit, trying to do it because it's the right thing. So I think it is a really exciting time, but it's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
And I think the EV space is really a really good example, but also heat.
Thank you. And government, what does government do? How does government begin to get its head around what this seismic shift?
I don't know. I mean, it's complicated. Yeah, and I've just been thinking about, some of the things that are happening, and you think some of the things that are really happening that we have invested in, like say Icebreaker One coming through one of the competitions that's running, the actual investment in innovation, because people going, well, we don't know what the future is, so we need to open it up to innovation. That is happening. So there is significant investment that you can, you can go after, funds you can go after to actually drive innovation from, there's a strategic innovation fund coming out of Ofgem and Innovate UK. There's, over 2 billion investment in future in Innovate UK. So that the funding is there. And then you look at, well, how do you ensure that consumers are protected? Because that's the point of regulation. That's the point of what we're trying to do is actually looking at the regulatory landscape. It's very complex for us, and we only just starting this journey. We've got digital markets being looked at by the CMA. We have challenges in the energy sector about how do we look at the digital elements that are coming out of the sector and ensure we put the right appropriate measures in there. We've got the challenges of different organisations from different parts of the ecosystem joining together with different regulators. It's very, very complicated. I don't think anybody's got the answer yet, and I don't want to be doom and gloom, because it's not doom and gloom. It's actually, people are asking the questions. People are thinking about what this future needs to look like and what the challenges are. It's just we haven't all got the answers to it all.
Thank you. Let's come to the question here, and if you feel comfortable, please say who you are as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rob Taylor. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur in the open source space. I'm a board member of OpenUK, and I also work on the Open Invention Network. So I drive an electric car. I normally drive a Tesla, but unfortunately somebody rear-ended it recently, and thanks to supply chain issues, it's going to be in the shop for at least 2 months. So I've got a non-Tesla at the moment, and it's been horrendous. It's compared to the experience, it's been horrendous. And one of the biggest things that I've come across is BP Charge, right? So they have bought up a vast selection of the earlier innovators in the charging space, and literally any time you go to a BP charge point, it's not going to work. Even the first time you use a charge point, you have to phone them up. Even though you've signed up for the card and you're paying money for it, you have to phone them up because they need to manually push out the update to the machine with your ID on it so it'll let you charge. So I guess the question is here, so there's kind of a question on the regulatory side here, should there be controls on companies like BP taking that dominant role in the market? Because literally, half of all charge points in the UK now BP charge, and they don't work. They literally don't work. So is there a regulatory role there? And then there's also that technology and user experience role. How do you bring an open market approach which also encourages that the same sort of usability I get when I'm a Tesla owner.
Great, thank you. So lots of things to unpack in that, but I'm immediately obviously going to come to you. Tell us the story there.
I think that you all know Tesla, of course, and maybe you have driven a Tesla, and if you have not yet done so, I do encourage you, just take a ride in a Tesla and you're sold forever. And you can think of Tesla what you like, because they are, of course, a proprietary solution, all locked in. But what they are doing is they are showing that it's possible, and they are miles and miles and miles ahead of other car manufacturers. But the reason why they are doing so well is because they came from nothing and they have everything to gain. The issue there is with a company such as BP, so once they start in this industry, and it's complex, it's infrastructure, innovation, do they really have the incentive to do really well? Do they really want to perform so well that instead of you saying in front of this audience, oh, it's horrible, and then maybe you think, man, maybe I'll wait another few years before I get an electric vehicle. If they did really well, you would be here saying, this is brilliant. You go to a BP station, you can charge anywhere. You should all get EVs. Is it really in their interest to move this industry forward fast? And they will do it, so they can say, well, half of the charging stations in the UK are ours. So we are investing, and we are committed. But I think, are they really?
So is there an example there of where there's been an intervention to change that siloed approach to a more open approach?
Yeah, well, this is in the Netherlands, one example. In the Netherlands, since 2015, so 6 years ago, we introduced roaming, which basically means that whatever car you drive, whichever service provider you have, you can charge everywhere across the Netherlands. So I'm explaining this to you now, but you know what roaming is. You have it with your phone, you have it with your bank card, and in the Netherlands for 6 years we have this with our electric vehicles. But everywhere else in Europe, literally, that is not the case. So we in the Netherlands, a few years ago, we thought, well, maybe they don't understand it, so we must promote it and explain how it works. But now we are thinking, okay, so if we can't explain that roaming is good for the consumer in Europe, if we can't explain it in 6 years' time, maybe it's not just that they don't understand it or they don't know how to do it. Maybe there's something else going on, that there are large industry players who don't think that roaming is maybe the way they should go, and maybe they should try lock-in consumers like other industries tried before, like in telecoms, and maybe they think they can buy some time, buy a market position.
Thank you. There'll be another question here, I think, in a second, but Helen, is there something going on?
I'm going to be honest. Right. So my role as Chief Data Officer is to look at the data, and I'll come back to it. What struck me when you were talking about it was actually what we need to do is to get to the end result, which is we know that the things we're putting in place are actually working. Yeah? To do that, we need data. To get to that data, we have to change the mentality. And I'm going to bring it back to the point of this session, which is about open data. So rather than going specifically at, well, it's a problem with the EV or it's a problem with certain players of supply chain, etc., like that, it's like, let's tackle this in a different way. Because we've heard this morning about some of the challenges about changing commercial attitude. Yeah? And Annika's just talked about it. But if we can change it such that we know that the data about our ambition, our desires is being made available through whatever mechanic we can put in place, we can start to see what the impact is on actual people living in the UK or living globally. Yeah? It's by having that data, by having the evidence, we can then make a change. The challenge is it's complicated.
Let's get this. So Richard, I'd like to bring in here.
So some of the data, yes. Some of the data, no. Which bit? The bit that I worry, like, you know, people say, what keeps you awake at night, Helen? It's like, where do we start? Yeah, which bit of data do we actually start with? Which is the piece or the pieces that are actually going to help us in this massive, great, big, complex ecosystem, actually start to make interjections and make a change. So it's that.
Thank you. No, hold on a second. Yeah. So, Richard, I'd like you to come in. So where do we start?
So just quickly to address this specific point, the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles has responsibility over charge points. They have the powers to enforce roaming. I believe they are minded to do that via contactless payments rather than accounts. So in theory, you will end up with, touch and go, and it should be fairly straightforward, in theory. But we'll leave that. But yeah, there is a electric vehicle energy task force that one of my colleagues at the Energy Systems Catapult are running, and that is looking at exactly these sort of problems. How do you create a good user experience? And your experience is very likely to be replicated by others, possibly with other manufacturers, and Tesla charge points were only, until recently, were only open to Teslas and da-da-da. So, anyway,
so Richard,
that's my
read
diplomatic answer.
Between the lines, I'll come to Lenica in a second, is that in order to convince the large oil companies and the new players in this space to be interoperable, it's going to require a big stick.
I think actually it's so interestingly, the BP charge points were not deployed by BP largely. They were deployed by ChargeMaster, who was an innovator that came forwards and created the thing. BP then bought them. So actually, to make everybody interoperable, because there is a I guess assumption that first mover advantage, build your market, lock everyone in. We've done it in telecoms, we've done it in streaming, we've done everywhere you can imagine. We assume that first mover advantage is the king, but actually interoperability ultimately is the king. Telecoms only works because of the interoperability. And I guess that's where we need to get to. And I think there's a bit of a carrot, we need to make sure that business models work for interoperability to make it valuable, but actually we need to also be aware that business models won't always be enough, and sometimes we do have to mandate and legislate and regulate to say interoperability, and even more so than just saying the ethereal concept of interoperability, we need to say in this way, this is how you make it interoperable. It's not always the best solution, but sometimes we have to.
Great. Lenica.
Yeah, I think that what was different maybe in the Dutch model is when I mentioned when we started, LEVs it was very small market, and there were a lot of players who were about the equal size. They were like startups, and they had this open mindset. They used open source code for everything. So they immediately understood, or basically we live in a world where we understand that if you want to grow and innovate, you need to work together, you need to be open. Basically, and you'll be horrified, the way we started with this interoperability, this roaming, the information was exchanged with Excel spreadsheets. Really, that's what we did. And we had a big database, and everybody sent their spreadsheet and uploaded in the database, and they distributed. That's how it worked, and it worked. And of course, this is no longer, so we upgraded. So it really isn't that hard to do, and I think what a lot of companies are trying to tell you in EV charging or in e-mobility or in electric cars, that it's really complicated and all these business models are complex, but you are maybe from other industries, and it's just not true. If other industries can do it,
I want to pick up on a couple of things there. One of them is that a lot of projects start with people sharing spreadsheets, and I think we shouldn't underestimate not making the perfect but the enemy of the good as one thing. But to Richard's point, there is a business case at the heart of this that has to be satisfied, and one of the drivers here from a net zero perspective is the environmental reporting now has to happen in the automotive industry, for example, right the way through the entire supply chain. And just yesterday, there's a data sharing initiative launched between the car manufacturers right the way through to the steel manufacturers to start unlocking data right the way through the supply chain. Now, what I'm hearing from one side of the room, as it were, is that we're starting to encourage data sharing for our environmental credentials, and we must do that. And then those communities bump into or clash with the supply chain management people whose job it is to keep everything as protected as possible and to lock down access to data. Can we go back into the audience now, if we come here? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Volker Buscher, the Chief Data Officer at Arab. We're one of the 9,000 companies that are interested in the energy market. And I have a question for Ofgem, for Helen. What you're doing right now is probably, it is market leading across the other verticals in the built world. And it is the answer to opening up these complex ecosystems. And I heard this morning companies don't know why this is a good idea. I don't think that is the case. I mean, we spent the last year looking at our own competitive position. We looked at our social usefulness. We're looking at the sort of new venture and innovation ecosystems growing around us. And what you're doing with Ofgem and with Icebreaker is exactly what we need. So what do you need from us as business to sort of get behind or support you so that this actually runs and happens for years and not just in 6 months steps and another 6 months and another 6 months?
So I'm going to give a position, and then I think Gavin should give a position, because obviously from an Icebreaker One perspective, I wouldn't want to answer that. I do think it's groundbreaking in terms of what we're doing, in terms of selling organisations. First of all, for certain selection, we expect you to be following some data best practice. Yeah? We expect you to be opening up your data. That is happening. Yeah? It's not theoretical. It's actually happening now. The challenge we have is, as always, whenever there's change, is you have some organisations who go, well, actually, we disagree. For whatever reason, they disagree. For me, it's just natural change. Yeah. Coming back to what somebody made a point this morning about how do we make that change happen? It's like, we'll just do it. It's by doing things that we will actually make the change happen. So my answer is, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit, what's the word? It's just ethereal or not as concrete as you like, is please just carry on taking the processes and the practices forward, because by engaging, by working together cooperatively with different parts of organisations, I'm just in that space of it will happen, it will change. In previous roles as Chief Data Officer, say I've enabled change in other industries, and you don't do it by necessarily just coming along and using a big stick and saying thou shalt do this. You have to get people on board, and you do that by getting people delivering projects that say this happened because of the fact we opened up data. So my ask is, please just carry on and support the initiatives as much as you can in terms of actual engagement in particular projects and showing the value, because by showing the value, it's always a case that the people who hook on and use those innovation techniques, they will come out and be better in the end, and they will be the winners, I'm sure. Gavin.
Thank you. So I'll come to you, Richard, in a second as well, but just to take that forward, one of the things we're doing with Icebreaker One is the Open Energy program that Francis Maud mentioned this morning. And we're very happy that Innovate UK and BEIS, working with Ofgem, are now helping to support that project into pilot phase. The approach, though, is to get industry in a room, round a table, to say, what are your use cases? Again, back to the question, where do you start? What have you got today? Are you in spreadsheet land, or have you got some APIs or whatever it is? And we've got a steering group actually on Tuesday next week to decide which specific use cases in EV and in flex markets are going to be the ones we take forward as demonstrators. From my perspective, it's the only way to get everybody round the table and to stop talking ethereally about we need to open up data, but let's work through the exact data value chain for a particular problem, work out who has got the data, work out where the friction is in that system, and again, it's rarely technical, but then get everybody on the train, as it were, into delivering a demonstrator solution and then looking at how you scale that. But Richard, from your point of view, working with companies, my observation is a very broad data maturity level and a huge skills gap within a lot of organizations. How can we best support companies on this journey?
That's a really good question. So I think, firstly, we've seen huge amounts of change over the last couple of years, 18 months. There's been massive amounts of change, both from a use case driven perspective of people saying, this is what I want to achieve, this is what I need to do it, and trying to work that through and work out what interactions do I have, what data do I need. And that's where the likes of Icebreaker 1 really come into the fore, because they unlock the more challenging areas where it can't be open data, it has to be shared. And we've also seen the really kind of proactive, almost government style of publishing open data off the back of data best practice that's going into regulations with Ofgem. And that's actually trying to really push this idea of be as open as you possibly can with your data, particularly where you're a regulated monopoly, because it is almost like a mini government entity. We need to be publishing as much as we can. And that gives you the ability for innovators to come and take that data and do cool stuff. And if we want that approach to keep happening, exactly as Helen said, people need to find those data sets, they need to pick them up, they need to use them, they need to show that there's demand for this data. As long as there's demand, they will keep publishing. If there's no demand, then it won't happen. And we've seen loads of good progress, particularly in energy networks and system operator, really publishing a lot of very detailed information. But we just need to keep the pressure up, keep asking for more, keep pushing, keep asking for it to be better.
So I want to come back to Lanark a minute, but please, we've got one more question coming here, but please get your questions ready. So bringing this back to, allegedly we've got a climate emergency. Is a business as usual innovation approach going to get us to net zero in time?
Well, a few things. So we do a lot of outlooks and see how the market is growing. And what we see that the market is growing faster than we expected. So the electric vehicle uptake is going faster than we expected. One of the reasons for this is that the prices of the batteries are steadily dropping. And at some point, it is just more economically viable, it's cheaper to run an electric car than it is a fossil fuel car, leaving besides all the emotional that comes with, you know, everybody sort of realizing that a diesel is not a future car. So you also see this in the Netherlands. You see so many electric vehicles driving around. So if you're buying a car and you're buying like a fossil fuel car, you sort of find like you're a little bit maybe outdated. So we see this tipping point. What is going to happen in a few years' time is where this price drop in batteries reaches a point where for logistical companies, the TCO, the total cost of operating a truck or a logistic vehicle is the most important thing. And it will become cheaper for those types of companies to operate electric trucks than it will be for diesel trucks. So, of course, immediately there will be a tremendous demand. You will see we predict a sudden increase in demand for electric trucks and buses. And, of course, the car industry knows this, so the car industry will be ready. But then that brings us to the utility companies, because these trucks, these logistic trucks, they will charge at, say, 2 megawatts. So if you have a logistics center, you know, with the 40 docking bays in a row, you see them along the highway. That means that they suddenly will contact the utility and say, okay, can I have 6 months' time 80 megawatts grid connection? And then the utilities will say, well, this is like a 10-year project. And then, of course, then the big question is, are the utilities ready for this? Are they prepared? Can they keep up the speed of the consumers, the businesses, and technology development?
So it's a bit of an arms race then, or a gold rush even, if the car companies are seeing the money. But how do we get everybody to come at the same speed?
Yeah.
I think there's a question here.
Sorry, I've taken my mask this time so you can hear me properly. I take us back to the electric charge for the cars. should we not legislate immediately, because that legislation actually will force the EV companies to collaborate and come up with an open charging point solution? Because again, we've seen it, you know, those of us who were traveling around Europe or around the world 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, roaming charges were incredible until it got legislated to drive that sort of consistency and collaboration as to how is this going to work.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that we have had a request to see if the market will solve this, and for a short time, I had the hope that the market would realize, learning what we've learned with mobile phones, that they would get it right first time, and I realize now that this will not happen. So I support you in that. I think that at a governmental level, that should be mandated.
We have very little time left as well, so there is that urgency in terms of the time.
Yeah, but and exactly what I meant. So in the Netherlands, we've had it for 6 years. So why doesn't France have it, Germany have it, Spain, UK have it? Why on earth are people putting up with the position of BP saying, yeah, you can only charge at my network if you're a BP customer, and if you're a customer from someone else,
so
you
we're
can't.
at OpenUK, and I think one of the themes of the day obviously is open innovation and how do we embed some of the thinking from other sectors. And if we look at the cultural difference between the evolution of software, for example, through into Linux and then Red Hat, and creating billions of dollars of value and creating huge amounts of infrastructure value for the web, what are the cultural elements there? You know, taking a company that's come from a very different background of sharing information, taking open models, moving to more of a service model rather than one that's baked around protecting patents and intellectual property. Richard, do you have a sense of, is that a culture change that's started? Is it underway? Is it necessary?
Yeah. I think in some ways it is already underway. Yeah, in some ways it is already underway. There are a lot of pockets of really good collaborative projects in the energy sector. The challenge is they're not always quick, and with an emergency, generally you need to respond fairly quickly, otherwise it doesn't work. And you know, that's the kind of situation we're in, that we can collaborate. It will happen eventually, and there's a swathe of new innovators that are really mission driven, that are coming, and they have great ideas. They know what they want to do. They have open source at their heart. You know, really encouraged in the energy sector. We need to make sure that the rest of the incumbent energy sector is equally open and will embrace them and actually use their solutions and their products and services. And there is a cultural change needed, and I think next year there's going to be a big push in that area. You know, we're really keen to help drive that sector-wide change, and I think actually that's one of the things that we could really benefit from, the people that are, you know, interested in coming to these kind of events and that can bring their experience from other sectors. We need to learn everything we can as quickly as we can to make sure that the energy sector can become open and collaborative and really drive it. We have the slight advantage of Helen and her colleagues being able to make strong suggestions in some areas and even mandate in certain areas, but that doesn't necessarily lead to the best collaboration. That can often be quite performative. So we need to create the cultural change, and we need to create the, you know, regulatory and legislative
So
change.
I think you touched on the innovators there, and I think, you know, big call to action here is for startups and the innovators to really lean into this process, because in the UK we have quite exceptional funding opportunities to fund innovation. And
Yeah.
Helen, with your Innovate UK hat on, you know, we've got many different sources of funding. Are there gaps in that? Or are there things or particular funds you'd like to draw people's attention to? Because this is one of the critical ways that government is supporting this transition.
From a funding perspective, there is specific energy funding. There's £450 million worth of funding in what's called the Strategic Innovation Fund. And there are a number of different parts to that Strategic Innovation Fund. Some of it is in the data and digitalisation area, but the the point of the fund is to open up ideas. Right? So coming back to the point of today's discussion, rather than sort of like trying to focus in on the challenges that we've got inside, it's like, how can we enable people to actually start thinking about doing things in a different way with open and using those fundings. There's also, as I say, from in Innovate UK, there's over £2 billion that can be invested, and that is open to everybody, from academia, from startup, from largest organisations, collaboration, from looking at different challenges that we have. And you can actually go after that funding from multiple different ways. So please do, if you've got those ideas, and I you know, from an investment perspective, if it's in the regulatory space, if it's in the data, AI, etc. space, then please come, you know, get in touch with me, because I'm very happy to talk about it.
Very much like to amplify that. And Icebreaker One itself has benefited from Innovate UK and BEIS funding, and we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for that. There's a question over here, and I think, is there one at the back as well? Yeah. So we'll do the one at the front first, and then one at the back. But I think, you know, the UK is incredibly privileged, and it's not something to be underestimated. The UK has more public funding for this type of innovation than exists, for example, in the US. In the US, you're pushed almost exclusively down the venture route and the private equity route. The UK has an incredible role here to play through public funding to develop more open solutions. And I think it gives the UK a real edge in the global economy here to develop innovation that has more open attributes.
Thanks, Gavin. My name is Ewan Hunter. I'm CEO, co-founder with a brand new organisation called Renew the World. Many of you would have watched our little film just before the session. I wanted to pick up on Richard's point, and actually I think he's slightly been skirted around in terms of the culture change that's required. I'm a people professional by background, leading lots of culture change programs and activities. And while there's lots of funding for innovation and technical innovation, there seems to almost be a belief that once the innovation has happened, then the culture will just magically fix itself. That never happens. So where's the funding directed at actually making that culture change happen? Because if you don't do it purposefully, it won't. I'd welcome everybody's thoughts.
Thank you. No, it's a very good point, and I think, you know, it's something that tends to get underestimated in most funding, whether or not, you know, not specific to the UK, but that level of institutional culture change. You know, Richard, back to you on that one. You know, where would you see the inflection points that are going to start to change that internal culture? Is it an education process, or is it lead by example?
I completely agree with you, to start with. It's a massive issue, and yeah, we do have a tendency towards directing funding towards hard technical solutions, hardware, software, all of that. I think, so we're starting to see a top-down change in terms of culture. So relatively recently, Good Energy advertised for a new CEO. They specifically said they wanted digital background. They wanted someone who'd ran a digital company. That's the first time I've ever seen a supplier, an energy supplier, saying they want someone with that background, and they found someone, and, you know, it all seems to be going very well. So we're starting to see, from a top-down perspective, leaders coming through who can articulate the value and who can drive the right cultural change. And I think a lot of this does have to be leaders driving change within organisations and creating that culture. But I think that the other challenge is we're talking about a sector here. We're not talking about one organisation and making them more agile or whatever the solution that we believe is right. We're talking about a whole sector, and that's really, really challenging. And we have to do that through collaborative kind of forums and groups. So, you know, we do a lot of work with the Energy Networks Association and Energy UK, Renewables UK, the Oil and Gas Authority. We're trying to bring everybody along, but that's quite collaborative, and you don't necessarily get funding for that, but they're so important, those groups. you're getting the likes of the Icebreaker One advisory committees and the steering groups trying to bring new people in to almost experience what is developing a digital product actually like. You know, we can't underestimate that kind of learning by doing approach that we get in the sector. And then there's all of the kind of leadership value of government and the regulator or regulators providing the right approach and the right kind of blueprint to take this forward. And Helen's role didn't exist a year ago, a year?
So I can sense that we might be near the end of our session. Yeah. So I'd like to finish off, and sorry we didn't get to the last question there. Yeah. I'd like to finish off with my usual call to action is for each of our panelists here is if you'd wave a magic wand and change one thing or have one thing happen, what would that one thing be?
What I think what we need to make sure is that while this industry is becoming the playfield of these large companies, we should fight to keep it open, because we need the new entrants, the innovators, the new ideas to have a chance to keep this industry developing in the right direction. And we should be aware that as we are now, it's being closed off, and sort of the environment for innovation is being sort of like a bit suffocated. So if I were to wave my wand, that is what I would wish for, to keep an open market. And if the large companies are taking over, fine, not necessarily a bad thing, but we in addition need the freedom for new companies to keep fighting to make this transition happen.
Okay. Helen?
Yeah, my one thing is this is going to take collaboration across lots of different parts of this whole ecosystem. You know, I've moved from private sector into public sector, into civil service. I would say, the one thing I would say is, in order to make change in that whole ecosystem, we need more people thinking about this challenge and working collaboratively and moving across between the different roles. So please don't sit there saying, well, that's for government to do that. So get involved, actually move, come and work. We need more people with the level of industry understanding and techniques actually helping from that oversight and central perspective.
Great. Richard?
I think targeting kind of the audience here and online, I think the thing that I'd like to see happen is, reflecting back on the cultural panel we had earlier, is to be collaborative, be open, for us to be open, and bring the sector, the not necessarily as palatable parts of the sector along with us, because we can't ignore hundreds of thousands of people and companies that are massive and have huge value. We need to bring them along. We need to use their skills, help them to transition, and deliver an open and collaborative, innovative sector.
Right. So common themes, maybe perhaps unsurprisingly, of openness, collaboration, and innovation, which is definitely themes for the day. I think just to close out, my one ask is for boards to de-risk this for their teams. So a lot of the challenges here in any form of culture change is knowing that you're not going to get fired for getting it wrong. We need to have a permission culture here for people to step into safer places and experiment and prove what the value is across the enterprises that they're working with. And with that, I will hand back to Amanda. Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you.
So I mentioned earlier that Gavin is about to go to the Blue Zone, and I've been kind enough not to hand him a bottle. There is one for him for later. These bottles there were 1,000 made from the melting ice cap, and they were brought here for world leaders. We managed to secure a few because we have the ice cap out the back. If you haven't seen it, it is worth seeing. It's going to be lit up, and it looks really stupendous when it's lit up. Great photo opportunity, but also something that really, I think, brings us back to what the day's about and makes us think about that. So, Gavin, stupendous, well done. I'm sorry I missed some of it. I didn't actually, because I could hear it out in that hallway when I was out there, which was great. All of the content will be on our website and available via YouTube by early next week. So if you have missed anything or you want to share what you've seen in this amazing panel, please feel free to do that next week. But can I ask you to join with me in thanking the panel?